This is the Sisters in Therapy podcast. I'm Dr. Mercedes, licensed marriage and family therapy supervisor.
I am Dr. Brittany Harrell, licensed professional counselor.
I am Dr. TK, licensed marriage and family therapy supervisor.
We are inviting you to be a part of our thoughtful, mind-shifting, mental health-related conversations that we have all the time amongst ourselves.
This podcast is not meant to replace your relationship with a licensed therapist. Now, let's get into the session.
We're back with another session of the Sisters in Therapy podcast, continuing our conversations. Today, we are spreading awareness on the severity of domestic violence and how this form of trauma impacts every aspect of a victim's life. Not only the victim, but their family, their friends, jobs, all the things. So we're going to highlight specific examples of domestic violence. So please listen and view with caution.
Absolutely.
Okay, so domestic violence is a violence or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse or a partner. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, an average of 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the U.S. More than 12 million men and women over the course of a single year. Domestic violence is also known as intimate partner violence. And it is a complex and dangerous issue that really thousands of people deal with every day.
Yeah,
Every day.
unfortunately.
I will open up and say that domestic violence was such a normal part of my childhood that it was like you was gonna see somebody get slapped at least 7 times a week. Like no matter where you go, if you're at home or if you're in a community, it was such a normal part of my childhood where I grew up. I saw people arguing and it turning very verbal, very physical, but definitely physical. Probably up until I was about maybe 13, it calmed down, but it was a very normal part of my childhood. I think that is why my tolerance is low for men who have aggressive behavior and like anger outbursts.
Yeah.
Tolerance is very low for that,
Yeah.
for sure.
It's really concerning. First, I appreciate you sharing that part of your life. It is such a prevalent issue, and I think social media, people who share those parts of their life, we're sort of thrust into that experience with people, and I know that it is certainly a call for help, but it is so triggering, and at this point it's such a nuanced, it's more expansive than people really know. And like you were saying before in the description, it affects every part of a person's life, like even their friends, their family, because you really don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Really, and it is scary, and we'll get to it in a second. There are a lot of misconceptions, and there are do's and don'ts as a viewer of your friend or family member going through something like that, because it is incredibly dangerous when a person is involved or is a victim of domestic violence.
Yeah. And nearly half of these domestic violence cases go unreported. 44%. You know, and it says around 1 in 4 women will experience violence at the hands of a partner.
You want to say something too?
No, I would just say that it's often, I feel like, sometimes so prevalent that we can become desensitized to it.
100%.
I've seen even on social media where it's
100%.
verbal, or maybe they're just breaking other things and not maybe putting their hands on the person. People are like, oh, this is it, this is all. And I feel like sometimes it also comes from victims because they're like, oh, well, it wasn't as bad as I got it. So it doesn't constitute abuse. And so just kind of across the board, we've become so desensitized to violence.
Yeah.
Desensitized to violence, and then also it is such violence itself is a big part of hip hop, right?
Yeah.
And so Megan Thee Stallion was a victim of domestic violence, and people were desensitized to it because she was a tall black woman.
Yeah, which is a common misconception.
That's also stigma.
Yes.
That I guess since her perpetrator was smaller than her, then somehow she should be able to take what happened to her.
Or because it was in the foot and not in her stomach. Like, how are y'all rationalizing this violence?
But that's a perfect example where everybody can kind of sit with and think about, was that domestic violence? Yes. It absolutely was domestic violence. And we have had conversations with men who said, nah, that situation was tricky. Wasn't nothing that tricky about it.
No, it's pretty black and white.
Pretty black and white.
No.
And I ain't even a black and white thinker.
Exactly. That one's pretty black and white. And
clear.
that's why, like, as I've gotten older, there are just some things that is not even a matter of opinion. It's right and wrong.
Right and
at
wrong.
this point. She was clearly a victim of that circumstance.
But one of the reasons why people rarely come forward is basically all the things that happened when Megan Thee Stallion. Megan Thee Stallion did not come forward. Actually, somebody else came forward for her.
Clarity.
Okay.
He taunted her. She really wanted to protect him. He started talking shit. And then she was like, you know what? As a matter of fact, this did happen. And then it unfolded.
The state picked up the case.
The state picked up the case primarily because he was a felon and had a firearm.
But the way that she was treated is one of the reasons why people don't come forward about domestic violence.
Yes.
And that was just my spill of that on that part. Moving forward, I'm going to define stigma. Stigma is defined as disapproval or negative beliefs directed at people with a specific identity or characteristics. And people experience this from institutions, organizations, systems, and even themselves, family members, friends. But more importantly, today, people experience it on social media all day, every day. And this topic is no different. It's no different. No. And I think that having this conversation is super important, but also it can be probably super hard and heavy.
It is.
So bear with us, please.
Absolutely. Yes, please. Definitely bear with us. I did want to read a couple of things. Okay. So, because I know a lot of times, which is one of the misconceptions, is that domestic violence is a gender, is specifically to women. So per the Center of Social Justice, domestic violence is routinely portrayed as a gendered crime perpetuated by men against women. The startling truth is that 1/3 of domestic violence victims are men. The social stigma surrounding domestic violence is even stronger when the victim is a man and the perpetrator is a woman.
Yes.
So that just can totally debunk that there is a perfect victim or that it's only women. Men are also subjected to this unfortunate experience.
I have direct experience with that in therapy. As a person, I didn't realize that there was a thing called domestic violence therapy. But I have had direct experience because I work with couples. And so if you are dating someone and you frustrate them on some level and they name call and just start insulting you and screaming things at you, that is emotional abuse. That is a verbal attack. And I have found myself working with couples like that where the woman does this to their partner. And that is a form of domestic violence. That is intimate partner violence. And I have had, and so there is work to be done with those people, and it is hard, but once both this type of intimate partner violence is appropriate for therapy, and it's something that I can work with, versus sometimes if there is physical, we have to really be like, you have to get that under control or we cannot continue services. But I have direct experience with working with men who have been emotionally abused by their girlfriends.
Yeah, me too.
Direct experience.
Yeah.
I think that because we have this misconception around like what constitutes domestic violence and that it can only be like these huge, harsh, like unforgivable things, that we also then do the disservice to ourselves and our partners by thinking that we cannot cause harm.
Yes.
Right.
Because you can. Just because you're a woman or just because you're not hitting anyone does not mean that you are not causing harm. And you need to know that you are capable of causing harm so that you can be mindful and ensure that you don't.
Exactly.
100%.
Should we sort of segue into the types of domestic violence?
Yes.
You okay with that? Okay. So it's pretty wordy, but I'm going to try to be as clear as possible. So the first one is physical. I think we know that one is when people are putting their hands on someone.
However, with the physical, sometimes people may think shoving or something such as throwing something may not be domestic violence, but it all falls under that category.
Absolutely.
Whether it's shoving, whether it's getting close to people, that still kind of constitutes to physical violence.
Not kind of, absolutely. And I've heard people even say choking somebody is not domestic violence, like
physical with somebody.
Yes, it is. Wow. Okay. Y'all think if somebody don't end up bloody or with a black eye, then it's not DV. But it is.
It definitely is.
Okay.
The next one is sexual. That encompasses a lot. That is also an underreported domestic violence issue.
Why is that?
Because that's a hard question.
It's hard to prove that a husband or
a
boyfriend or a girlfriend rape their partners or coerce them into sex.
Right.
But it is definitely a part of intimate partner violence.
Yes.
I think a lot of times also in intimate partner violence, both partners don't see it as that
especially
or don't
coercion.
Find it being justifiable because it is from both ends. They say because it's my partner, it's okay.
That's unfortunate.
Well, there are actually incidents to where a partner can actually rape their partners very
Yes.
abusively.
Yes.
So it's definitely violence.
Yes, absolutely. The next one is emotional. This is where undermining an individual's sense of self-worth and or self-esteem. There's economic, controlling or restraining a person's ability to acquire, use, or maintain economic resources to which they are entitled, and that includes coercion, fraud, or manipulation to restrict a person's access to money. Next is psychological. This is causing fear by intimidation, threatening physical harm to self, partner, children, or partner's family or friends, forcing isolation from family, friends, or school and or work. And the last one is technological. This is an act or pattern of behavior that is intended to harm, threaten, control, stalk, harass, exploit another person using any form of technology. I want to say that I think emotional and psychological. I think people use those interchangeably, and I might admit that I have used those interchangeably.
You
I
might.
think they can be used interchangeably.
Okay.
I think so. As you kind of listed those types of domestic violence, I think that I knew that like the definition for economic, but I never called it economic violence or
Yeah, me
abuse.
neither.
But that is definitely a thing.
I see financial abuse a lot.
Yeah.
I guess yes, 100%. But I did not know that it was a type of, but I knew it existed.
Right.
I think it's one of probably the most
100%.
prominent because people again don't see it as abuse,
Yes.
but it's one of the main ways. I might be wrong, but I feel like it was almost like top 3 ways that people cause abuse. It's because they don't see it as harm, but it's one person who doesn't have money, they don't have access to money, they don't have means, and then also usually control of social connections comes up there, or isolation, because if I'm the one providing all the money, then you
Yeah.
get to kind of come and go as I please or talk to who I deem is okay to talk to. And so they're just isolated financially across the board from within their home and even outside of their home because they don't have those connections.
Right.
And therefore, it feels helpless
Yep.
to be able to get out because we all know that we need money to live and survive. Not to
Exactly.
mention if a child is involved.
Yeah. I wonder if technological domestic violence, if that's a rather new one, especially with how broad social media is now. I know there's been so many talks about cyberbullying, and that actually might fall under technological domestic violence, but I meant to look that up if that's one of the newer forms of violence in relationships. I'm not sure. But we can sort of segue into like us as clinicians because it is such a dangerous period. Like, how have we been trained as clinicians to sort of, I don't want to say address, but sort of handle a client who's in a domestic violence type of situation? Like, were there any particular trainings for y'all?
Well, first you would have to assess for a DV. And actually, there are plenty of tools and screening measures out there to assess for DV, a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
But the way that I assess for DV is really straight to the point, is really on my questionnaire. And one thing I'm always doing is talking about safety with people. Favorite conversation in the therapy room, since I do work with couples, it's important to establish that people feel safe in their homes.
Yeah.
So the way that I handle it is first is assessing it to see if it's a part of their dynamic. 2 is education, because sometimes they're doing things they don't realize that this is kind of borderline
Teetering
DV.
on line.
So that's how I assess for it, and I mean that's how I address it in therapy. With my couples, it's more so education, but with clients who come in and they are experiencing things, I think the biggest thing is trying to get them to understand like this is problematic.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think the most recent one would be stalking from an ex.
Yeah.
And clients thinking that, oh, they're not going to do nothing. I'm like, no, this is getting a little concerned. So for 12 months, this person has been harassing you
Right.
on the phone, showing up at your home. That is red flag behavior.
Yes.
And so convincing clients that this is not therapy no more. This is me telling you this is a problem,
Right.
and we need to address it as such.
Right.
And that has been hard because people don't see certain things as abuse. Because it's so normalized.
Right. Especially if we're talking about emotional or psychological, right? It's almost, for a lot of people, it's, well, at least he's not hitting me. And that's a terrible way to rationalize it, though I get it, but it only will continue to get worse. And I think that's one of the common misconceptions is that at least he's not, or at least she's not. But it's the fact that it's happening at all that makes it a problem and incredibly dangerous to be in a relationship that way.
100%. T, how do you address it in therapy?
Like you said, I definitely just kind of assess for it first. And I'm really on board with both of you because one of the main things that I see is really just pointing out, and clients will tell me, like, I had no idea that this was your face right now, or these questions are letting me know that this isn't okay. And so it almost amazes me every time that they have almost like just so little awareness of how much this is not okay. But a piece of them knows it's not okay because it's causing them distress and it's causing them to come in. But it's almost like they don't recognize that they have the right to not be treated that way.
Right. Yeah.
Until you tell them, like, it doesn't matter if you don't do the dishes perfectly or if you didn't take this out of the dryer. Like, that doesn't mean that you get to be, like, verbally accosted for hours.
Right.
On end because you made a misstep.
Exactly.
And so I think that's, like, maybe sometimes culturally, I think that's social media, just the desensitization to just violence in general that's made everyone just really scale back how they perceive violence or harm.
Yeah. I think one of the more subtle things that people don't recognize is how prevalent manipulation is. And it could be so subtle that people don't readily recognize it, which is sort of a way that I try to assess. My immediate thought is like you're in a domestic violence situation, but when they're talking about an experience, I'll directly ask, how did that translate to you? And the key word that people are using now is gaslighting, right?
Oh my God.
Like, and you know what? I use that depending on the age of my client, but then I'll explain that to me. What does gaslighting mean to you, and do you actually feel like? Because it is manipulation. Like,
but the question about what does gaslighting mean to you? No, what does gaslighting mean in general? But
In general,
but
right.
no, we're gonna have to have a
Correct.
conversation.
We gonna come
Gaslighting
back to
is
that
not
one.
manipulation. We're gonna have to have a conversation about gaslighting.
And there is a set definition.
It's
There is a way to
being
know what it
used
is and what it
incorrectly,
ain't.
100%, because that is not the same thing.
okay, well, I have been corrected.
No. I'm like, oh God, everything is not gaslighting, guys.
Right.
Okay.
But I to my point is I think manipulation is a very subtle, very subtle way of either coercing or convincing or trying to force this person to not believe that what you did was wrong. And so, and then clients begin to question themselves. Well, maybe I'm tripping. They didn't really mean it that way. And then it continues on. And then before you know it, they end up losing their whole identity. It always is subtle. And I keep saying that because it doesn't automatically physical is not always the immediate one.
No.
It might get there gradually, but there is and I'm trying not to, this is a heavy topic, but it's a slow burning process. And I think we underestimate the impact of manipulation. I'll put it that way.
I think we underestimate the potential for harm or violence.
Yes.
And I don't say that to scare anyone or to say that we should live in fear. Because I feel like I have that conversation a lot of how do you, like, radically accept that these things have the potential to happen, and so that you can be cautious but not accept it so much to where now you are isolating yourself and you aren't living a full life. And I think that there is a very thin line there, but I think you really do have to account for both sides. We have to be real with ourselves whenever it comes to another individual's potential to cause harm.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you speak of the subtle, like, gradual kind of increase of manipulation over time, that is like a compounded trauma.
Yeah.
over and over again, people begin to kind of believe what their partners are saying about
Yes.
them. They begin to think that the people that they love don't love them. And
Right.
so I say, like, once we see this in clients, like, what is our role to empowering them? Because come back to power and autonomy here.
Yeah.
What is our role, though, when clients bring this up with us in therapy?
I am always questions. I have so many questions because I want you to see it.
Right.
I'm asking, how would you have perceived it if that would have happened to you? How do others perceive this? Did you just start doing this thing? Has it always caused this much of a problem? You know, like the way you put on your shoe or the way you close your door. Has this always been a problem? Have you always done it this way? Okay. Have other people seen you do this? What is it like in other situations? Because maybe you do always slam the door and everybody in every situation is like, hey, you need to chill out. You need to stop slip. Like maybe it is across the board.
Yeah. Right.
But, and so then we can see both sides of it. And they're like, no, actually this is the only place to where this is constantly a thing. This is the only place that I get this kind of like recourse or consequence. Or, hey, yeah, I've been imperfect at it like this, but it's never caused this big of a response.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have had situations in therapy where women have come to see me and things just be abnormal, and I'm the type of person that's going to ask questions because you did not have a cast on your foot 2 weeks ago. And I'm knowing the type of, so jealousy is another thing that's kind of, that we haven't talked about, but
underestimated.
a jealous partner is a
Yes.
dangerous partner.
Yes.
Absolutely.
100%.
And we think we have that narrative of like, I want him to be obsessed with me.
Yes.
That is dangerous.
Yes.
Very dangerous. Jealous and obsessive.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Very dangerous. So
Yes.
in as I sit in the therapist seat and I work with different women, like there have been women who come to me and they point out things and they say things, and then I ask questions and they say yes to this, and I say, well, that is abuse, that is domestic violence. I say, I'm concerned for your safety. I don't feel comfortable knowing that you're going back to that environment.
Yeah.
And so those people do ghost me.
I've had that happen before.
And I never hear
Same.
from them again.
Same. Yeah.
Agreed. That's happened to me before as well. And I do feel like that is a part of a therapist's ethical responsibility. There are some things that we're like, okay, I'm not going to lead you to that answer, or I'm not going to absolutely call it this or call it that. I'm going to let you come to it. These are not situations in which, in which we can let you come to it or be completely objective. No, it is what it is. And whenever there is a potential or actual harm to yourself or someone else, we have to call it what it is.
The thing,
Absolutely.
we have to call the thing the thing.
We have to call the thing
And
the thing.
in this situation, sometimes so I think that people come to therapy and they want to cope with things and how to be better. But like you said, this is one of those things where we have to be like, girl, I can't help you cope with this type
Yes,
of,
and I have had that.
this type of
I'm not.
treatment.
I have literally told clients there are not enough boundaries in the world to better handle. Because first of all, I'm not giving you no type of skills to better handle somebody putting their hands on you.
I'm not.
Or manipulating you or talking
Yes.
down on you. That is not my job.
Not at all.
No.
And if you're listening to this and you're questioning whether or not you are in an abusive relationship, you're probably in an abusive
You're
relationship.
probably yep.
And you have something in the notes, Britt, about like the most dangerous time is when somebody try to leave.
Yeah.
And if you've been with somebody for so many years, and maybe you guys have never raised your voice at each other, but there's no talking, there's no connection, I still think that it's dangerous for you to go tell that person, I want a divorce. And so how have you guys had this in therapy where people come to you and they want to leave their partners?
Yes.
Okay. That has been a very common thing in my practice lately. And I was telling Takesha, I'm starting to, try to think of ways in which we can safety plan or maybe make connections with HPD on how to help certain people who come in and say, I want to leave my husband. Because those are things that people are coming in and saying in therapy. And then I'm like, well, we can't just go and say this. We need to have some type of plan in place. We need to have people who know that you want to do this, and we need to have days in which you want to. This has to be something that's
It is a
planned,
plan.
and it has to be thought out.
Exactly.
Because I do think it's dangerous when people try to leave relationships and marriages.
100%. And
Yes.
I think there are numbers and statistics that say
Yes.
that this is true. And so
Yes.
I think when we talked about like how do we deal with it in session, I think that that's always been
Yeah.
a very specific way in which I've probably been trained in DV. I don't thankfully have to use it as much now, but I have had to use it before, and it is a legitimate safety plan. And you start working on the process of, okay, identify 2 people that you want to tell that this is happening. Okay, so you don't have access to financial means, but you get an allowance for groceries. Okay, they're cutting back on, like, I'm going to take $20, $40 of cash, and I'm going to give that to my mom or one of my 2 people, and they're going to start putting money back for me. Or I am going to apply for a credit card, but I'm going to have it sent to my mom's house. And so days and times, and when kids are out of school, and it's a very strategic
Yes.
plan that multiple people, you can't do this alone.
No.
So,
No, that is true. And so this is not something that I have to do often, but I have been faced with that in 2022, and then now I'm faced with that again, and I'm like, okay, I'll be honest, this is not the work I like to do as a therapist, but every now and then this is the work that I'm handed. And sometimes you don't get the clients you want, you get the clients you need. And so every now and then I get a client like this, and they just so happen to pick me, and they say, I want to do this thing, and I'm like, whew, okay, this is going to take careful, strategic planning. And so I have had to rethink the way in which I help clients process this, and kind of like you just gave that perfect example of safety planning. But now I'm thinking I need to do something more. Like, I need to have a HPD contact. It's something that I've been thinking about lately as a therapist.
And we should. And I know, and again, I haven't had to use those contacts here, but in Denton, there was a specific place that we would call, and it's almost like it's a hidden. And I know they have it here because I've worked with someone
Probably
who
the
came
Houston
out
Area
of it.
Women's Shelter.
Yes. And so there are these places that they house women, and you call and you make contact, and then there is almost like a meetup place. You never know where the house is. So even when people make donations, like no one knows this location but the people that work there. And I love, it's giving me chills now thinking about it, because it's such an important part of the safety planning process whenever it comes to trying to remove yourself from those situations. So I do think they have it here.
They do. That part they do have. But sometimes the women that I'm working with, they don't want to go to those shelters. They want to stay and they want to keep their home.
Right. And if that's the case, because I have certainly helped a few clients, talk to your leasing office, ask them to change your keys. If you have the financial means, get you a Ring doorbell. Put certain protective factors in place. That way there is evidence in case you need to get a restraining order. And the most important thing you can do is alert your leasing office. I believe that there is a clause.
It is.
If you are in a domestic violence situation, you can break your lease. I think.
I've seen it. You can.
And so I have been like plagued with the idea that this is not an apartment. This is a home that 2 people share. And we have to have conversations about what is the most important thing here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I get it.
But do know you can leave the leased apartment.
Yes,
Okay.
you can leave the lease. Yes,
Okay.
that is a
Please
clause
do.
in there.
Okay.
And you can do that. Have you guys had people come in looking for a path to healing after being in a domestic violent relationship?
Yeah.
What has that been like?
Hard.
Very hard.
Okay.
Like any other trauma, but I feel like it's different, because usually a lot of the trauma that I would traditionally work with is like a childhood trauma or even teen trauma. This trauma is so usually recent and so fresh. And it is with a person that usually you chose versus it being family. Like, you don't choose some of these childhood things. And so that lack of like trust or faith like in yourself, it's hard.
It is so heavy, because the unlearning is such a journey that they are working so hard to get this person's. Ooh, I'm about to get emotional. They are working
you and me
so
both.
hard to get this person's voice out of their head. They are trying to learn who they are outside of this damaging relationship, and it is valuable work, but it's hard, which is why it's hard for people to leave.
You're speaking about like the common mental health consequences of domestic violence, which would be PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the most common mental illnesses developed from DV. And I'm going to always think about Tina when I think about I don't think about Tina just in DV. Tina is great, but Tina Turner is who I think about when I think about PTSD. Because if you listen to any of her interviews later in life, she's describing how she felt in the aftermath of leaving Ike, and it was definitely PTSD. And we watched her documentary, and she said, well, I think her husband said, like, it felt like coming home from war. Is how she described her
Jesus
life with
Christ.
Ike.
I'm sure.
Being with him was like coming home, but coming home from war. And that's literally what it's like for people who live in a
Yes.
home that's filled with DV.
Yes.
And one of the worst things you can do for children is put them in an environment where they see you being abused because they feel so helpless.
Yeah.
And it really does damage.
It does.
In children.
It
like
does.
To children, to you, to everyone involved.
Yes,
so I
exactly.
wish that we would all just may do away with this ideal that staying in a 2-parent home
Oh, yes.
is the best case scenario for your
Right.
children.
Right.
It is not.
No.
Stop lying to yourself.
Yes.
Stop going after like your wishes, your dreams, your desires, or the childhood that you didn't get. I'm sorry if I'm coming off harsh, but this does not work. We have
doesn't.
plenty of evidence.
Yes.
Plenty of statistics,
No.
real life stories of how this does not work in
Exactly.
the short term or in the long term
It doesn't.
for you or the children.
It literally doesn't. So I wonder if we could sort of shift a little bit,
Yeah.
because I know we're running out of time. Because I want to shift the conversation to people who are friends or family members of a loved one who is in a domestic violence situation. Have y'all had clients who have been a friend or a family member of a person who's being abused? And if that is the case, what are some ways that you've helped them? Like,
So I have had a client who had this experience, but I did not have to help her. Her husband told her she could no longer be friends with this person if the person decides to stay in a relationship, because it became dangerous for his wife because her husband is now threatening his wife. And no, he like, no, sir, no, ma'am, you have to move around. That's your friend. I get it. But at some point I cannot risk going to jail for like bringing harm to this man, for bringing harm to you.
Right.
And while I want to help your friend, she's choosing to stay. And I need you to let go of this friendship.
Yeah.
So I have had people who have friends and family members in this situation, and what they have done is remove themselves from that person's life. And it's not because they want to, but it's because the person don't want the help.
yeah.
At the time, I don't want to say is that they don't want the help. Maybe they don't know how to take it, or maybe they're afraid. And so I get wanting to distance yourself from those relationships. I also see the other side of it in being that is also what the abuser is looking for,
Yes.
is to get this person isolated.
Yes.
And so I think ideally we can find a way to keep yourself safe while also still finding subtle ways to let this friend know that you are there. Because no matter how long it takes, it's going to be a lot more likely that they have the strength and the courage to leave one day if they know that they still have support on the other side.
I get that, but if clients are coming to see me and they are saying that this is bringing harm to them, and that the friend is now that friend is being emotionally abusive to my client,
Oh, yeah, no.
then I'm like, that is hard. And so
Yeah.
we just kind of agree with the fact that every now and then, not agree with the fact, but we problem solving that every now and then my client will send her friend a message on IG. That's about the best. That's the best solution that we have come up with.
Yep.
Just to say, hey, just checking on you, like I'm here. That's kind of all
That's
she can do.
I think
That's
that's
all-
perfect.
Because now it's causing issues in her marriage.
Right.
Her husband is not comfortable with her being friends with this young lady.
And rightfully so, because it is incredibly dangerous. I have certainly had a few clients that have been friends or a family member of a loved one that's been abused, and it gets very dangerous. How many stories have we heard about a friend going to go help a friend, and the friend who went to go help their life is being taken because they went to go help, and it is such a dangerous, and it's hard to see your loved one in a situation like that. And like you were saying, the hope is that one day they'll get the strength to leave. But who wants to get the call at 2:00 in the morning, or who wants to hear these stories? And so, like, I'm trying to be careful with my words, but I think we do have to have a limit to what we subject ourselves to when it comes to that, because it's hard and it's heavy.
I mean, I witnessed it today on my way here. And I hate seeing my own people out doing this, but I definitely was getting some food, and I seen a man and a woman, and it was definitely
I've
DV.
seen it too.
Just today on my way here, I was in a parking lot,
Random
and
people.
I'm gonna say that the woman, I don't know what happened, but honestly, she should have left the man alone when he told her to leave him alone.
Oh yeah, that's different.
Leave him
Yes.
alone.
Yeah,
She
that's
stopped pleading
That's the
with him.
thing, too.
He is like, he getting upset, and to this point, he's about to get ready and lose his cool.
Right.
That's another thing.
You have to leave the man alone when he says
Right.
leave him alone.
Don't antagonize.
I don't
Right.
think she was trying to. I think she was trying to make things right.
That's
He did
fine.
not
That's
want
still
to hear it, though.
antagonizing. I
Yeah,
think
okay.
we need to learn how to respect when somebody does the work and has the willpower or the strength to say, "Hey, I'm gonna walk away. I'm gonna take a minute."
Yeah.
This is a mutual responsibility type of situation. You have a responsibility to let them walk away.
Yeah.
There's another side to DV that I have had that I've kind of witnessed as a therapist, and that's working with clients who witnessed this as children,
Yeah.
and they have grown up, and this trauma has really impacted them in a way that they kind of like mad at everybody who sat around and watched
Absolutely.
their mother go through it.
Yeah.
And my responsibility is to hold space, but to also ask questions to help my clients see it from said family members. We don't know what your family members tried to do. It is really hard to help people who, when they not okay, we can't say they don't want the help, but they can't decide that this is danger and that they should leave.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, people think that love and abuse can coexist.
Yes.
It
Bell
cannot.
Hooks says it cannot.
It
And I
cannot.
believe Bell.
Right.
Yeah, so
Period.
that has been another side of DV of working with and just kind of holding space for that client, because that's the long lasting impact of growing up in a home where you're seeing one of your parents being abused by their partners.
Yeah.
I've never had a person who witnessed it who said that it did not have lasting impacts
Right.
on them, how they view relationships, and even themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's devastating. One of the things that was suggested per my research on like what you can do, obviously domestic violence in we've discussed all types. Control is the main, if that's the mission, right? And so one of the things that it was suggested, don't tell them what to do, because then you're sort of unintentionally perpetuating control
Yeah.
on this person, right? Like
Agreed.
they ultimately have to decide. And again, I know it's hard to see your friend or loved one in that situation. Encourage small steps, provide resources. I love the idea of messaging on like Instagram, something that could be a little bit more discreet, or you two can come up with it together. There are a lot of apps that look like a calculator that ends up being something else. Like have some type of protective things in place. Just please try not to tell this person what to do, because they have to be the ones to decide
I think that's
when they're
hard
ready
for
to
people.
leave. It is.
I can't sit here and act like I even told people in my family, you need to leave.
Of course.
You need to go.
Of course.
Because this is dangerous.
Of course.
And
But even in saying that, they still have to decide when they're ready to do it.
no, 100%.
Yeah.
And if you are a
I just keep telling them they deserve better. I think
Yes.
they
Oh,
don't know that
100%.
part of
Yeah.
like,
oh, I say that too.
you know, you don't have to be like, this isn't the only way. We get into such a scarcity mindset, and again, that goes back to just wanting to have a body there, wanting to have a person, and it's like you don't have to do this.
Yeah.
This isn't the only way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if you are struggling with this and you're thinking about going to therapy, I would say that therapy is the perfect place to empower you to make choices that are in your best interest, whether it's leaving an abusive relationship or seeking legal protection.
Yeah.
So if this is something that you are experiencing or something that you may have a friend experiencing, therapy can be an appropriate place to process that. But just know that change only comes when you are ready for it.
Yeah.
And you have to decide when you're ready for it. People ignore change all day, every day.
Yeah.
And it is not uncommon for a therapist to want to terminate with you if you're in a physical,
Yeah.
abusive relationship, and we don't want to do nothing about it. There's no change coming about. And when I first started being a therapist, I was a student, and one of my first clients walked in with a black eye. She was South Asian, and it was culturally, that was another thing I meant to talk about. It can say that, oh, that's what they do in their culture. That is a thing that people say about DV. And so having this person walk in with a black eye, I obviously had to seek supervision on how to help this person. And I did not see her much after that because she decided not to come back, because we reached out, we got resources, got everything lined up, because therapy also helps people kind of sneak and get a plan together.
Yeah.
That's another reason for therapy.
Yeah.
And I didn't see her again, but I definitely had practice with this early on in my career, and I realized this is not something that I wanted to do
Yeah.
as a therapist
It's
all.
hard. It's
It is
hard.
very hard.
Oh, well, like you said, Sadie, we will certainly have appropriate resources for you all. Please listen to this with care. This is certainly heavy, and not, like we've all said, this is not something that we really want to have to talk about, but it's so prevalent. So we will certainly have good resources for you. If you end up not looking at there, you can Google what's appropriate for you. But please be safe out here. And we just got to love on each other.
Yes, and go love yourself.
Go love yourself.
Go love yourself.